"She's just being dramatic," Evelyn said, as I cradled Chloe's limp body in my arms, skin hot with fever, lips ghost white, pulse flickering like a dying bulb. I'd come to feed a dog. Instead, I found my niece locked in a bedroom, days from death, while her grandmother greeted me in pearls and perfume like it was Sunday brunch. But that wasn't the worst part. The moment I got Chloe to the ER, Evelyn vanished. And somehow, I became the villain. My wife called me paranoid. Her brother threatened legal action. They left me holding the bills, the blame, and the truth. They didn't know what I'd already seen in Evelyn's past, and they had no idea what I was about to build in silence. Now they've got 30 days, before the foundation under their lies crumbles. My name is Adam Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. I've spent 2 decades building my carpentry business where handshakes still turn into contracts, and neighbors become lifetime clients. In my workshop, where fresh sawdust mingles with burnt coffee and Monday morning radio hums, I keep everything in its place: tools, receipts, and boundaries. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, bless her heart, never understood those boundaries, treating every favor granted as down payment on the next request. My old friend Mark from the construction days knows my way. Documented, detailed, reliable. My niece Chloe used to spend summers here when she was little. Her laughter ringing across the yard like hammer strikes, her trust carrying me through the lean times. Something's shifting, though. I can feel it in my chest like pressure before a storm. But let me start from the beginning. The text from Evelyn came just after 11. "Adam, dear, could you check on Buddy this afternoon? Emergency with the church group. Keys in the usual spot. Thanks." No question mark. Just that familiar assumption wrapped in sugar. I'd done this enough times to know the drill. Feed her oversized retriever. Maybe let him out back if needed. Simple enough. You ever notice how some favors just feel different? Like there's a weight to them you can't explain? I pulled into Evelyn's driveway around noon, the summer heat already thick enough to make the asphalt shimmer. Her split level sat quiet, blinds drawn tight against the sun. The spare key waited in its hiding spot, a clay pot by the front steps that had probably seen better days 20 years ago. The moment I opened that front door, something felt off. The foyer air hit me with a mix of bleach and what I recognized as Evelyn's perfume, that powdery department store scent she'd worn since I'd known her. But it was too strong, like someone had been trying to cover something else. "Buddy," I called out, stepping into the living room. Everything looked staged, pillows too perfectly arranged, magazines fanned out just so on the coffee table. This wasn't a lived-in weekend house. This was a showroom. The kitchen light clicked on with a soft buzz, casting shadows across counters that gleamed like they'd just been wiped down. Buddy's bowl sat full by the back door, kibble untouched. That wasn't right. That dog would eat himself sick if you let him. Then I heard it. A soft tapping sound, irregular enough that it couldn't be pipes or wind against a window. It was coming from down the hallway, where darkness pooled beyond the reach of the kitchen light. My boots seemed too loud on the hardwood as I moved closer. A door stood cracked open, and something glinted in the gap. A key, hanging from the inside lock like it was daring me to ask questions. "Chloe?" The name slipped out before I could stop it. Something in my gut had already connected dots I didn't want to believe. "Honey, you in there?" The whimper that answered was so faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I pushed against the door, but the jamb had swollen in the summer humidity. It took my shoulder to break through, and then the darkness swallowed me whole. The curtains were drawn, but enough light leaked around them to see the shape on a carpet. Chloe lay curled on her side, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something. Her lips had gone pale, and her eyes, God, her eyes were open but glazed, like she was looking straight through me. "Jesus, Chloe." I dropped to my knees beside her, fingers finding her wrist. Her pulse fluttered weak and fast under skin that burned to the touch. When I peeled back the blanket tangled around her, bile rose in my throat. The bruises told a story I didn't want to read. Not fresh marks from violence, but the deeper stains of a body left too long without care. Her clothes hung loose where they should have fit, and the air in the room had gone stale with sickness. How long? How many times had I driven past this house, waved to neighbors, fed that damn dog while she lay here wasting away? Shame crashed over me like a physical wave. I gathered her up as gently as I could, one arm under her knees and the other supporting her back. She felt like nothing. A bird with hollow bones. Her head lolled against my chest as I turned toward the door. That's when the shadow fell across the threshold. I froze. Chloe's shallow breathing, the only sound in the world for one endless moment. Then Evelyn's silhouette sharpened into focus, her figure blocking the hallway light like an eclipse. The church group emergency, the staged house, the locked door with its key left like a taunt. It all clicked into place with a clarity that made my vision tunnel. I looked down at Chloe, then back at her grandmother, and waited for an explanation I knew could never be enough. Evelyn stepped into the hallway light, dressed in her Sunday best, pearls and pressed slacks like she'd just left the church potluck. That smile of hers stretched thin across her face, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. I'd seen that exact expression 100 times over dinner tables and holiday gatherings, but now it cut like a razor. "Oh, Adam." Her voice dripped sweet concern, but something cold lurked underneath. "You shouldn't worry yourself. You know how teenagers are, all drama and attention-seeking." She waved her hand like she was brushing away a bothersome fly. Best to let her sleep it off. My arms tightened around Chloe's frame, feeling each shallow breath against my chest. Sleep it off? The girl was burning up, probably hadn't had water in days, and her own grandmother was treating it like some kind of high school gossip. "The neighbors," Evelyn continued, smoothing her blazer, "they do love to talk. We wouldn't want to give them the wrong impression, would we?" I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I walked straight past her, my shoulder nearly brushing hers in the narrow hall. The garage door clicked open under my elbow, and the afternoon sun hit me like a spotlight. I'd parked my truck at an angle, thank God, made it easier to slide Chloe across the bench seat. Found my old work sweatshirt behind the seat. Folded it gentle as I could under her head. The emergency room lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting everything in that sickly green-white glow that makes everybody look half dead. A nurse appeared with a wheelchair, all efficiency and quick questions. I helped settle Chloe into it, watched her dark hair spill over the vinyl backing as they wheeled her away through double doors. "Sir?" A woman in blue scrubs stood at the intake desk, pen hovering over forms. "Are you the responsible adult?" The word responsible hit me like a sucker punch. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting, hoping maybe, to see Evelyn rushing in with insurance cards and explanations. But there was only the automatic door sliding shut on empty air. "Sir?" the woman prompted again. "We need someone to sign these forms before we can begin treatment." My hand felt heavy as I took the pen. The signature line waited at the bottom of the page, blank and accusing. I'd signed thousands of contracts over the years, each one a promise I knew I could keep. But this one felt different, like I was signing up for something bigger than myself. The pen scratched across the paper, and I swear I could feel each letter hooking into my future, like a fish line set too deep to remove. "Insurance information?" the woman asked, already feeding more papers into a printer that clicked in Word. "Let me just—" I turned again, but Evelyn had vanished completely. The waiting room held nothing but tired faces and old magazines. When had she slipped away? Had she even followed us into the hospital at all? The printer spat out another form, and the woman slid it across the counter. There at the top, in clean black type, "Responsible party, Adam Whitaker." Click. Another page. Click. Another responsibility. Click. Another consequence I couldn't yet see. A nurse pushed through those same double doors, gesturing for me to follow. As I walked toward where they'd taken Chloe, my footsteps echoed in the too bright hallway. The place was full of people. Doctors conferring in corners, nurses checking charts, families huddled on plastic chairs. But somehow I felt completely alone, the only witness left to whatever had happened in that locked room. I remembered the bruises on Chloe's arms, the key hanging in the door like a confession, the way Evelyn's smile never wavered, like she'd been expecting me all along. Each memory stacked up like evidence. But evidence of what? The automatic doors whooshed shut behind me as I stepped into the hospital parking lot. Sodium lamps buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly orange glow that made even healthy people look sick. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I'd been putting off these calls, but they couldn't wait any longer. I hit Melissa's number first. My wife picked up on the second ring, worry clear in her voice. "Adam? What's wrong?" "Mom said you were supposed to feed Maggie today." I leaned against my truck, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mel, I found Chloe locked in a bedroom at your mother's house. She was barely breathing, dehydrated. I had to bring her to the emergency room." The silence stretched for 3 long beats before Melissa spoke again. Her tone had shifted from concern to something harder, more defensive. "What do you mean, locked in? That doesn't make any sense. Mom would never—" "Mel, listen to me. The door was locked from the outside. There was a key hanging right there like it was normal. She was burning up, couldn't hardly move. You're reading too much into this, Melissa cut in. Chloe's probably just exhausted from school. You know how teenagers get. They don't eat right, don't sleep enough. My free hand clenched into a fist. This isn't about being tired. Your mother vanished the second we got to the hospital. Didn't even stick around to sign the intake forms. Mom's been under a lot of stress lately. I'm sure she just panicked. The way she dismissed it made me feel like I was disappearing, like my words were turning to smoke before they could reach her. I tried one more time. Mel, you didn't see her. This wasn't normal. Just come home, okay? We can sort this out quietly. I ended the call and immediately dialed Darren's number. Chloe's father needed to know what was happening. The TV was blaring in the background when he picked up. Yeah? He sounded distracted, annoyed at the interruption. Darren, it's Adam. We need to talk about Chloe. What about her? I explained again. The locked door, the state I'd found her in, the hospital. With each detail, I could feel Darren's attitude hardening over the line. Jesus Christ. Adam. He wasn't distracted anymore. What are you trying to pull here? You trying to embarrass the whole family? Pull? Darren? Your daughter was locked. Chloe runs hot, always has. Gets fevers all the time. Mom knows how to handle it. She was barely breathing, I insisted, but the words seemed to slide right off him. You need to apologize to Mom, Darren said. You way overstepped here, making everything dramatic. And if you keep inventing stories like this, I swear to God I'll get a lawyer involved. Defamation's a serious thing. My legs felt weak. I slid down the side of my truck until I was sitting on the curb. Inventing stories? Darren? I signed the hospital forms myself. She's getting IV fluids right now. Yeah, because you panicked and made a scene. Just like you're doing now. There was a rustling sound like he was standing up. Fix this, Adam. Apologize to Mom, and drop it. You're making everyone uncomfortable. The call ended with a click. I sat there under the buzzing lights trying to make sense of what was happening. How could they not see it? How could they twist everything around so fast? My phone vibrated in my hand. A text message from Evelyn lit up the screen. We need to talk. Those 4 words sat there like a threat, or maybe a promise. I could feel something breaking, not just in me, but in the whole family structure. Like when you're working on an old house and find that first crack in the foundation. The kind that tells you everything above it is already compromised, just waiting for the right pressure to fall. Behind me, the hospital doors hissed open and closed, a rhythm like breathing, or maybe like sighing. I barely slept that night, and morning hadn't properly settled when my phone rang. The hospital's billing office caught me before I could even pour coffee. Mr. Whitaker, I'm calling to verify your signature on the intake forms from yesterday's admission of... There was a pause, paper shuffling. Chloe Bennett? My hand tightened around the phone. Yeah, that's my signature. As the responsible party, you understand this places you as guarantor for any charges not covered by insurance? The word guarantor sat heavy in my stomach. I understand. She needed help. I couldn't just leave her there. Of course, sir. We'll need a deposit of $12,000 by the end of the week to cover initial treatment and monitoring. I steadied myself against the kitchen counter. $12,000. That was more than last month's entire profit margin. I'll figure something out, I managed. After hanging up, I grabbed my tools and headed for the Morgan job site. Didn't even bother with the radio. Needed the quiet to think, to rehearse how I'd explain this to Melissa. We had some savings, sure, but this would hit hard, and that was assuming no complications, no extended stay. I was measuring a joist when Carol, Evelyn's next-door neighbor for 15 years, called. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. Adam, I thought you should know. Evelyn's been talking to people about you. My level wavered slightly. What kind of talk? She's saying you're obsessed with control. That this whole thing with Chloe is about money. About you trying to take over everything. Carol paused. I know it's not true, but she's being very convincing. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Right in the core of my reputation. 20 years of building trust in this community. And Evelyn knew precisely how to chip away at it. Thanks for letting me know, Carol. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. I'd just set my phone down when it buzzed again. Tom Wesley's name lit up the screen. He'd hired me to build his wraparound porch next month. Good money job with potential for more work through his country club friends. Adam, hey. He cleared his throat. Listen, about the porch project. I think we need to put that on hold for a bit. Timing feels a bit unstable right now, you know? I watched another square of revenue disappear from my mental calendar, like shingles peeling off in a storm. Tom, if this is about what Evelyn's saying, No, nothing like that. Just timing. We'll revisit it later, okay? But we both knew we wouldn't. My phone had stopped being about craftsmanship. Now it was all about reputation, and Evelyn was making sure mine wouldn't hold up. The sun had already set by the time I made it home. Melissa had left a plate of dinner on the table, gone cold hours ago. I placed the hospital invoice next to it, first of many, I figured, and stared at the numbers until they blurred. My phone vibrated twice more before I could even pick up my fork. 2 more cancellations, the Petersons' cabinet remodel and the Hendersons' deck repair. Then a voicemail from someone at the local paper asking for comment about ongoing family drama. I pushed the plate away, appetite gone. Tomorrow was already tipping, and I couldn't catch my balance. Every call felt like another brick being pulled from the foundation I'd spent decades building. And somewhere across town, Evelyn was probably smiling, knowing exactly how her words were landing. I looked at the invoice again, at the numbers that would keep growing, thought about Chloe in that hospital bed, about how she was worth every penny and more. But that didn't make the weight any lighter. Didn't stop the quiet dread of watching everything I'd built start to crumble. The kitchen felt colder than usual that night. Melissa sat at the table, her face lit by the ghostly blue glow of her phone screen. It painted the walls like those hospital corridors I couldn't seem to escape, even at home. "Have you seen what your mother posted?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from how her thumb kept scrolling. Scrolling. "She's worried about you, Adam." Melissa's voice had that careful distance I was starting to hate. "Everyone is." I leaned against the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Worried about me? I'm not the one who—" "Listen to this," she cut in, reading from the screen. "I'm deeply concerned about Adam's recent behavior. His accusations are completely unfounded, and his obsession with control is becoming unstable." Melissa looked up at me. "Why would you sign those hospital forms without talking to any of us first?" The question hit like a slap. "Because your niece could barely breathe, Melissa. Because someone had to do something. You always make everything about pride," she said. And that word, pride, stung worse than being called a liar. Because pride was what I'd built my business on. Pride in showing up when I said I would, in doing the job right the first time, in being the kind of man people could trust with their homes and their money. My laptop chimed with a new email. I opened it, knowing what I'd find. Another cancellation. This time, it was the Riverfront Commons project. 3 months of work gone in 2 sentences about reevaluating vendor relationships during this sensitive time. Remember those old cartoons where someone's watching their life savings drain through an hourglass? That's how it felt. Watching my business calendar empty out. I pulled up the payroll spreadsheet, and the numbers stared back at me like an accusation. 8 guys depending on me for their mortgages, their car payments, their kids' school supplies. The cash flow projection tightened around my throat like a noose. "Maybe we should file a police report," I said, more to myself than Melissa. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see how that would play out. More spectacle, more rumors, more contracts vanishing into thin air. The whole week would disappear into a black hole of accusations and counter-accusations. No, I needed to stop reacting and start thinking, start documenting. The kitchen clock ticked past midnight as I dug through my email, printing out every hospital summary I could find. I pulled up the photos I'd taken of Chloe's condition. On my phone, the bruises, the dehydration, the lock on that bedroom door. Each image got its own timestamp, each detail carefully noted. "What are you doing?" Melissa asked, but I barely heard her. I was too busy building my case the way I built my houses, piece by piece. Everything in its proper place, everything documented. My phone lit up with an unknown number. The contact name simply read, Mark. And something old and familiar stirred in my memory. Coffee-fueled mornings hanging drywall, the bite of sawdust in the air, conversations that went deeper than just work talk. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep the wariness out of my voice. Behind me, Melissa stood up from the table. She didn't look at me as she left the room, and somehow that silence felt louder than any argument we'd had so far. The space between us stretched like a shadow at sunset, growing longer with each passing a minute. I watched her go, phone pressed to my ear, waiting for a voice from my past while my present seemed to be slipping through my fingers like so much sawdust. I hadn't been to Dixon's Diner in years, but the place still smelled exactly the same. Coffee and bacon grease and those vinyl booths that squeaked when you slid in. It was the kind of joint where working men gathered before dawn, where you could still get a decent breakfast for under $10. Mark was already there when I walked in, tucked into a back booth like he'd been waiting all morning. 20 years hadn't changed him much. Same weathered face, same careful way of watching the room. His hands were still calloused from real work. Not like these developers who'd never swung a hammer in their lives. "Black coffee," he told the waitress before I could even sit down. It wasn't a question or a suggestion. More like passing sentence. I remembered how he used to drink it on job sites, standing in the early morning chill while we planned out the day's work. "Been a while," I said, settling into the booth. "Too long." He studied me for a moment. "Heard about what's happening with Evelyn." The name made my jaw tighten. "Seems like everyone has." "Yeah. Well." He reached down beside him and pulled up a manila folder, thick with papers. "I've got some experience there. 3 years ago, she hired my crew for a major renovation. Halfway through, she started telling the neighbors I was padding bills, stealing fixtures. By the time I figured out what was happening, I'd lost half my contacts in that zip code." My coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat steady me. "Why didn't you say something? Would have looked like sour grapes." "Besides," he tapped the folder, "I was busy collecting evidence instead." He opened it up, and I felt my eyebrows rise. There were pages of screenshots, text messages, emails, all carefully dated, voice recordings on labeled USB drives, notes about patterns, about how she'd use one person's sympathy to turn others against you. "This is what these stories do," Mark said, his voice low and serious. "They spread like cancer if nobody cuts them out early. And right now, she's getting ready to make her big move." I took a sip of coffee. "What move?" "She's preparing a custody petition for Chloe. My contact at the courthouse says she's already started the paperwork. Once she gets custody, she can claim all kinds of government benefits. Disability, support payments, you name it." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "She can't. She can try. And she's got a 30-day window to file before the initial evaluation period closes." Mark pushed a legal pad across the table. "Write it down. Today's date and day 30. That's your deadline." I did what he said, pressing the pen so hard the paper nearly tore. 30 days. Not even a month to stop this woman from getting her hands on Chloe again. "Here's what we do," Mark continued, pulling out specific papers from his folder. "First, we gather every hospital record, not just from this incident, but any time Chloe's been treated in the past year. Then we talk to her teachers, get statements about attendance patterns, behavior changes. Finally, we follow the money. Every government check Evelyn's received, every deposit, every withdrawal." I nodded slowly, seeing the strategy take shape. "Build the case piece by piece." "Exactly. No drama, no accusations, just facts, numbers, dates, witnesses. Let the evidence do the shouting." The diner was filling up now, the morning crowd rolling in. I could hear the grill sizzling, plates clinking, the familiar sounds of another workday starting. But all I could focus on was that number. 30 days. Staring up at me from the legal pad. Mark reached across the table and tapped it twice with his finger. 30 days starts now. The bell over the door chimed, and I swear it sounded like a starter's pistol. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. 2 days after that diner meeting, I sat with Mark in my workshop, spreading papers across my workbench like we were piecing together a puzzle. The familiar smell of sawdust and coffee couldn't quite settle my nerves as we dug through the evidence we'd gathered. "Look at these dates," Mark said, tapping a highlighter against a hospital summary. He had this way of spotting things others might miss, the same eye that could catch a crooked stud before it ruined an entire wall. "Chloe was admitted 3 times in the past year, always when Evelyn had custody. Each time, severe dehydration." I nodded, feeling my jaw clench. "And here's her attendance record from Ridgeview High." I slid over a printout covered in red marks. "Missing 2, sometimes 3 days a week when staying with Evelyn. Perfect attendance otherwise." Mark picked up another sheet, a list of government check deposits we'd managed to track down. His finger traced down the columns, pausing at certain entries. "See how the amounts jump right after each hospital visit? She's working the system, Adam, using Chloe's condition to bump up the benefits." The pattern was emerging like framework under drywall. Solid, undeniable. You just had to know where to look. "We've got enough," I said, gathering the papers into a folder. "I should talk to her first before we file anything, show her what we know." Mark's expression tightened. "You sure that's wise? If she sees we have proof, maybe she'll back off. Save everyone the public mess." I checked my watch. "She'll be home from church about now." "Your call." Mark stood up, brushing sawdust from his jeans. "But remember, people like her, they don't fold easy. They double down." 20 minutes later, I pulled up to Evelyn's house. The porch light was on, despite the afternoon sun. like she was expecting company. When she opened the door, she had this look on her face, all sad eyes and worried brow, like she'd been rehearsing concern in the mirror. "Oh, Adam," she said, voice thick with fake sympathy. "I've been so worried about you." She waved me into the living room, which looked staged for visitors. Fresh flowers, family photos arranged just so. I sat on the edge of the couch while she settled into her armchair like it was a throne. "I brought something you should see." I pulled out the hospital intake forms and placed them on her glass coffee table. "Want to explain why Chloe was locked in that room?" Evelyn didn't even glance at the papers. She just leaned back, crossed her legs, and smiled. Not the warm smile she used for church functions, but something cold and sharp. "No one will believe you." 4 words, delivered like she was commenting on the weather. My stomach turned to concrete. "The hospital records," I started, "show that a troubled teenager had another episode," she cut in, "and that her unstable uncle, who's been having business problems by the way, overreacted. You know how Chloe exaggerates when she wants attention." She tilted her head. "And you've always loved an audience, haven't you, Adam?" Every word was a nail thrown under my tires, designed to puncture and deflate. I looked down at the proof in my folder. The dates, the records, the clear pattern of neglect, and suddenly it all felt flimsy under the weight of her certainty. I stood up, my legs wooden. Evelyn didn't move, just watched me with that same cold smile as I walked to the door. The evening air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. Porch lights were starting to flick on up and down the block, and somewhere a dog was barking. I pulled out the legal pad from my back pocket, checked the countdown we'd started at the diner. 18 days left. 18 days to somehow make the truth matter more than Evelyn's lies. I walked to my truck with humiliation dragging behind me like a heavy coat, remembering what Mark had said about people doubling down. He'd been right. I'd shown my hand too early, and Evelyn hadn't even flinched. I sat in my darkened workshop the next evening, letting the radio murmur baseball scores to empty air. The Braves were up 3 in the 7th, but I barely registered it. My phone sat heavy in my palm, a half-written text to Melissa glowing on the screen. "Maybe we should let this go, for the family's peace." The cursor blinked like a judgment, and I couldn't bring myself to hit send. The defeat felt as heavy as waterlogged lumber across my shoulders. You know that weight. When you've carried something so long your arms forget how to put it down? The crunch of tires on gravel snapped me back. Headlights swept across the wall, then died. I wasn't expecting anyone this late, but I recognized the measured footsteps coming up the walk. Mark appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the security light, carrying a banker's box like it held gold. He didn't waste time with small talk, just pulled up a stool and started laying documents across my workbench, precise as setting tile. "Got these certified by the court clerk this afternoon," he said, tapping a stack of hospital records. I leaned in, squinting in the shop light. "These are all Chloe's visits?" "Everyone. But look at this." He laid out printed emails from 3 of Chloe's teachers, each noting the same pattern. Absences clustering around her stays with Evelyn. Then came the killer. A spreadsheet tracking government benefit deposits against Evelyn's ATM withdrawals. "Jesus," I breathed. The numbers lined up like fence posts. Benefit increases following each hospital stay. Cash pulled out within days. She was using Chloe's condition to boost the payments? Mark nodded grimly. "And the dehydration episodes? They spike right before benefit review dates. Almost like they're—" He let the thought hang. The shock crystallized into something harder as the pattern snapped into focus. All those times Evelyn had called for help with Chloe. All those convenient illnesses. They weren't random. They were calculated. "We need to file this," Mark said, pulling out motion papers. "Let the documents tell the story, not emotions." Courts listened to paper. The suggestion felt like someone had finally opened a window in a stuffy room. I'd been trying to outshout Evelyn's lies when I should have been letting the evidence whisper. We worked straight through until midnight, the printer chattering like a metronome as we assembled exhibits and drafted my sworn statement. Every hospital record, every teacher's note, every banking document got tagged and numbered. Mark knew exactly how to lay it out so the pattern was impossible to miss. "Court opens at 8, he said, sliding the last affidavit into place. "We'll file first thing. Get it in front of a judge while we're still inside that 30-day window." The clerk's date stamp would land like a hammer in less than 8 hours. I stared at the neat stacks of proof, thinking about Evelyn checking her mailbox tomorrow, not knowing what was already in motion. She'd told me no one would believe me. She hadn't counted on anyone believing the paper trail instead. I stood up, my back creaking from hours hunched over the bench. The radio had gone quiet sometime during our work, replaced by the soft whir of the shop's ventilation system. Mark gathered the files while I locked up, both of us moving with the careful precision of men who know they've just built something solid. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, we had our blueprint, and every measurement checked out true. 2 mornings later, I pushed through the heavy oak doors of County Courtroom 3B, a 3-inch binder tucked under my arm like armor. Mark's footsteps behind me felt steady as a foundation. You ever notice how courtrooms smell like furniture polish and worry? This one had both in spades. The gallery benches were mostly empty, just a few scattered faces I didn't recognize and didn't want to. Up front, Evelyn sat ramrod straight at the counsel table, wearing a black suit that practically screamed, "Wrongly accused grandmother." She didn't turn when we entered, but I saw her shoulders tighten. "All rise," the bailiff called, his voice bouncing off the wood paneling. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Martinez presiding." Judge Martinez swept in, her black robe rustling as she took the bench. She had the kind of face that said she'd heard every story twice and believed half of them. Her eyes swept the room as we settled back into our seats. "Calling the matter of Whitaker versus Reynolds regarding custodial interference and financial oversight," the bailiff announced. The words echoed like hammer strikes in the quiet room. "Counsel and parties, identify yourselves," Judge Martinez said, adjusting her reading glasses. Evelyn's attorney stood first, some downtown type with a silk tie that probably cost more than my best saw. "James Woodward for the respondent, Your Honor." I rose next, my chair scraping against the floor. "Adam Whitaker, petitioner, representing myself, Your Honor. And this is Mark Thompson, serving as my witness and advisor." The judge nodded, shuffling papers. "I've reviewed the emergency filing. Let's keep this focused. I want brevity and clarity. Save the dramatics for television." Her tone carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. "Mr. Whitaker, summarize your position." I took a breath, remembering Mark's coaching. "Stick to facts. Let the documents do the heavy lifting." "Your Honor, on Saturday, August 12th, I found my niece Chloe locked in a bedroom at her grandmother's house. She was severely dehydrated, barely conscious. I transported her to Memorial Hospital where she required immediate medical intervention. The memory of Chloe's pale face made my voice want to shake, but I kept it level. The room went library quiet. Even the ceiling fans seemed to pause. "Objection, Your Honor." Woodward stood, straightening his tie. "Mr. Whitaker is painting a rather dramatic picture of what was simply a concerned uncle overreacting to typical teenage behavior. Ms. Reynolds has been nothing but a devoted grandmother." Judge Martinez lowered her reading glasses, fixing Woodward with a look that could have stripped paint. "Counsel, I asked for facts, not characterizations. Do you have documentary evidence to support your position?" "We have character witnesses prepared to testify." "I asked about documents, Mr. Woodward." The judge's pen tapped against her desk. "Mr. Whitaker, I see you have exhibits. What's your chain of custody?" This was the moment Mark and I had prepared for. I opened the binder to the first tabbed section. "Yes, Your Honor. I have certified copies of all hospital records, signed by the records custodian. School attendance records with notarized authenticity statements. Bank statements showing benefit deposits and corresponding withdrawals, verified by the institution." I handed the first stack to the bailiff, who passed them to the clerk for stamping. The judge studied the first page, her expression unchanged but her attention sharp. More papers made their way up. Teacher emails, medical bills, benefit statements. Each one another brick in the wall of evidence. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, finally, looking up. "The core issue here is custody and potential financial misuse. Can you demonstrate a direct connection between the two?" I felt the room's energy shift, like when a level bubble finally centers. Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope we'd gotten from the county recorder's office just yesterday. "Your Honor," I said, nodding to Mark as he slid the envelope across the table. "We can." The clerk broke the envelope seal with practiced fingers, and the sound cut through the courtroom like a chisel splitting wood. Inside was a ledger I'd seen so many times my eyes could trace it blind. Column after column of government benefit deposits landing in Evelyn's account, followed by cash withdrawals within 24 hours, regular as sunrise. You ever watch someone's face when they realize they can't talk their way out of truth? That's what I saw, happening at the counsel table across from me. "Your Honor," Mark said, his voice steady as he stood, "I'd like to draw your attention to the pattern beginning in March." He stepped forward with additional copies, and I noticed his hands were clean. He'd scrubbed the workshop grime off for court. Each deposit was followed by a withdrawal at First National's drive-through branch on Hamilton Avenue. The judge studied the pages with the focus of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and was checking for new ones. Her pen traced down the columns, tapping slightly at each matching set of numbers. "We have more," I said, pulling out a stack of sworn statements from Chloe's teachers. The affidavits weren't fancy, just simple, honest words from people who'd watched my niece fade like old wood in sun. Mrs. Patterson from English noted how Chloe dozed through morning classes. Mr. Rodriguez from chemistry documented unexplained absences that lined up perfect with those bank withdrawals. She'd come in looking exhausted, one statement read. When I asked if everything was okay at home, she'd just stare at her desk. The bailiff passed each document to the judge, and I swear you could hear Evelyn's attorney's shoes squeaking as he shifted his weight. "Objection, Your Honor," Woodward finally sputtered. "This is nothing but a vindictive attempt to—" "Counselor," Judge Martinez cut in. "Are you objecting to authenticated bank records and notarized statements? On what grounds? These records are irrelevant too." "Clerk," the judge interrupted, "please compare the timestamp on the hospital intake forms with the withdrawal receipt from August 12th. The clerk's fingers moved quick over the papers. "Hospital admission 2:47 p.m. ATM withdrawal from the account at 3:12 p.m., Your Honor." I watched the judge's posture change. Subtle, but I'd seen that same shift in clients when they moved from doubting to believing. She sat straighter, her eyes sharper. For the first time in weeks, I felt solid ground under my feet. "This court will take a 15-minute recess to review these exhibits in detail," Judge Martinez announced, gathering the papers. "Parties are instructed not to discuss the case during the break. We'll reconvene at 10:45. The bailiff called, "All rise," and we filed into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everyone look a shade paler. I noticed a guy by the bulletin board, pretending to read notices while his pencil moved across a small notepad. Press badge half hidden under his jacket lapel. "Local paper," Mark whispered, nodding toward the reporter. "Attention cuts both ways. You ready for that?" I thought about Chloe in that locked room, about all the whispers that had tried to bury the truth. "Let them write it," I said. Every word. The minutes ticked by like hours. I watched Evelyn's attorney make 3 separate trips to the water fountain, his confident stride getting a little less confident each time. The manila envelope sat warm in my hands, and I could almost feel the weight of all those numbers, all those facts that couldn't be smiled away or explained into shadows. "Court resuming," the bailiff called, holding the heavy door. "All parties return." I squared my shoulders and walked back in, the envelope's flap still warm against my fingers. Time to let the truth finish what it started. The door opened, and we filed back in like workers returning to a half-finished job. Judge Martinez sat with her papers arranged in 3 neat stacks, the kind of organization that tells you exactly where things are headed. "Be seated," she said, and the room settled into that heavy quiet that comes before big moments. You know the kind. Like when you're about to make the first cut on an expensive piece of timber. She looked down at her notes, then straight at Evelyn. "This court has reviewed the submitted evidence thoroughly. The findings are as follows." My hands gripped the edge of the table. 20 years of building things had taught me that precision matters most at the finish line. "First," Judge Martinez continued, her words clicking together like perfectly joined boards, "the court finds clear and convincing evidence that the respondent, Evelyn Marshall, failed to provide adequate care for the minor child, Chloe Marshall. The documented medical condition upon hospital admission reflects severe neglect." Evelyn's attorney started to rise, but she pulled him back. "Down." I watched her spine stiffen like she was bracing for what came next. "Second, the evidence demonstrates a consistent pattern of financial exploitation. Bank records show systematic withdrawal of benefit funds intended for the minor's care. With no corresponding evidence these funds were used for their designated purpose." The judge paused, lifted her glasses, and spoke directly to Evelyn. "Third, and most disturbing, this court finds the respondent's actions actively undermine the child's physical and emotional well-being, as corroborated by multiple independent witnesses." My chest felt tight. I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. "Therefore," Judge Martinez said, her voice carrying the weight of final measures, "this court hereby orders the immediate removal of all custodial rights from the respondent. A temporary guardian will be appointed pending permanent placement evaluation." The gavel came down with the solid finality of a nail driven home. "Furthermore, the respondent's access to all related benefit accounts is suspended effective immediately. The clerk will provide certified copies of this order to all parties." I let that breath out slow, feeling Mark's hand squeeze my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked across at Evelyn. She sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead while the color drained from her face. All those years of performed concern, all those careful acts of public kindness, they'd finally run out of stage. The clerk moved efficiently, handing out copies of the order. The paper felt solid in my hands, like the first true board laid level after weeks of crooked ground. Each page carried the weight of facts that couldn't be twisted or denied. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Martinez gathered her files. "This matter is adjourned." We stood, and I heard Evelyn's chair scrape back too fast. Her attorney was already pulling out his phone, probably planning appeals that wouldn't matter. The double doors opened to the hallway's fluorescent glare. I'd barely taken 3 steps when I saw the reporter push off from his spot by the bulletin board. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, raising a small microphone. "Channel 6 News. Would you care to comment on these years of cruelty finally coming to light?" I kept walking, but the word cruelty hung in the air. The story was already taking shape in ways I hadn't planned. "No comment," Mark said firmly, steering me toward the exit. But I could feel camera lenses tracking us, hear the scratch of pencils on notepads. The courthouse's main doors swung wide, and there they were, a row of news vans parked along the curb, their satellite dishes reaching up like metal trees. Somewhere in the distance, sirens murmured through the morning traffic. Mark's hand stayed steady on my shoulder as we walked down those stone steps. 20 years of building things had taught me another lesson too. Sometimes the strongest structures rise from the clearest foundations. And now, finally, we had one of those. The morning after court, I was already in the workshop when my phone started buzzing. Mark had texted a link to Channel 6's website, where the headline hit like a hammer strike. "Court strips guardian after neglect." Below it, hospital photos showed Chloe's room with faces and details carefully blurred. But the locked door and empty water bottles told enough of the story. Every hour, Evelyn's name scrolled across the news ticker. The same neighbors who used to praise her church committee work now crossed streets to avoid her shadow. Even Carol, who'd spread those first whispers about me being unstable, hurried inside when Evelyn's car passed her mailbox. You know how small towns work. By noon, the Ridgeview Ladies Charity Club had posted a formal statement on their website. "In light of recent revelations, we wish to clarify that Mrs. Marshall's past involvement with fundraising events does not reflect our organization's values or standards of care." I wasn't watching for the fallout, but you couldn't miss it. The court clerk's database already showed the custody ruling, plain as blueprint paper. Now the public judgment was spreading just as fast, closing all those doors Evelyn used to waltz through without question. No more charity galas, no more church leadership meetings, no more neighborhood welcome committees. What mattered more was the spare room upstairs, where Chloe was settling in with a new lavender comforter and a calendar marked with doctor follow-ups. The first real laugh came 3 days after she moved in. Just a quick burst while we were watching some old comedy show. It startled both of us, that sound of joy still finding its feet. Melissa watched it all from the kitchen doorway, her coffee going cold in her hands. One morning she just said it straight. "I'm sorry, Adam. I should have listened." No dramatic speech, no self-defense, just truth. Finally as clean as fresh-cut pine. "We'll be all right," I told her, keeping my voice level. Not triumphant, not bitter. Just steady, like a well-set joist. Mark showed up that weekend with his truck bed full of cedar boards. Beautiful stuff. Rescued from that commercial build that canceled on me during the chaos. "Thought we might put these to good use," he said, running his hand along the grain. "Build something that won't lie to anybody." I looked at those boards and saw a porch taking shape in my mind. Not just lumber and nails, but a promise made solid. Chloe came out when she heard us moving wood. "Can I help?" "Sure can," I said, handing her a sanding block. "Start with the long edges, nice and steady." We worked through the afternoon, the 3 of us. Measuring twice, cutting once, fitting each piece like it mattered. Because it did. Chloe learned quick, her hands getting sure with each board she touched. The sun was dropping low, turning our front lawn to copper, when we stood back to look at the progress. The porch was taking shape, each board speaking plain truth. Here's what care looks like when it's built right. I watched Chloe run her hand along a freshly sanded rail, and something in my chest settled into place. You see, I've spent my life building things that last, not just houses and furniture, but trust. The kind that holds up under weather and weight. And standing there in that copper light, watching my niece trace the grain of honest wood, I knew we'd built something stronger than all of Evelyn's lies. Maybe that's what I really needed to tell you. A man's honor is worth more than family lies, worth more than peace bought with silence, worth more than reputation built on shadows, worth every splinter and every sleepless night it takes to keep it standing true.